Hey friends, I'm not the only one who's starting to feel like the AAA industry is going downhill, right? And if big budget blockbusters used to drive the industry forward, now it's the opposite. Indie developers with AA games are stepping onto the scene more and more, and they're literally mind-blowing with their creations. One of the latest examples has to be Hollow Knight Silksong, which even crashed several online stores on release day. That's how much people wanted it. That's exactly why today I've gathered 20 of the best single-player games that came out recently. Games that truly deserve your attention. So don't skip ahead so you don't miss anything, and let's get started. Let's start with a real gem this year. One that's not only one of the most beautiful games, in my humble opinion, but also a true gift for all JRPG enthusiasts. I'm talking about Clair Obscur Expedition 33. The story setup literally describes the phrase, "Trouble has one beginning." A woman was sitting around, bored. And that's exactly what we have here. The thing is, a mysterious woman appeared in the game's world. They call her the Painter. Every year she writes a number on this mysterious monolith, and whoever's age matches that number, well, they die a year later. She's basically terrorizing everyone at this pace. And then one day, she writes the number 33. As you can probably guess, that's our main character's age, and also the name of our expedition. Throughout the game, we're leading this expedition to defeat this main evil. The story setup and overall execution is just fantastic. And the gameplay doesn't disappoint either. At first glance, it's a JRPG, but with real-time elements mixed in. So, you're choosing attacks, but you can also dodge, parry, and counterattack in real time. And you simply can't ignore the sound in this game. It's magnificent. I'm sure almost everyone who played through this game added a couple tracks to their personal playlist. The visual presentation is also incredibly good. The art design and overall artistic work here is on some unbelievable level. So this game can easily give any modern AAA game a run for its money, if you ask me. If for some strange reason you still haven't played it, I highly recommend fixing that. Next up is, of course, Hollow Knight Silksong. Without exaggeration, the main AA game of this year, according to many journalists, players, and in my opinion too. Despite the game having some rough spots, like the difficulty being too high at the beginning, when you're literally stabbing enemies with a needle while you only have a few HP, and some enemies knock off 2 masks at once. Whereas at the end, with an upgraded nail and tons of masks, even bosses don't present much challenge. This doesn't ruin the game experience at all. On the contrary, it motivates you to explore locations looking for upgrades. Though, if you don't want to, you can get through without them. The game gives you that choice. Gameplay-wise, this is a 2D Metroidvania with just gorgeous visual style, detailed backgrounds, foregrounds, tons of optional animations that affect the atmosphere of each location. You can see how the developers lovingly created this new game world. We play as Hornet, a secondary character from the first part, with her unique abilities and properties. This brings a lot of new elements to what might seem like a familiar format, like those diagonal downward strikes that many people didn't like. But spoiler alert, you can fix that later with upgrades. Plus, the setting is a new kingdom with a big living world and its own backstory. You'll encounter not only plenty of enemies and bosses, but also various NPCs. Basically, if the first Hollow Knight was a classic Metroidvania, then Silksong is more of an adventure with optional quests, secondary characters, and incredible atmosphere in the details. If you somehow missed this game, I strongly recommend it. But keep in mind, it doesn't forgive mistakes and forces you to level up your skills as you progress. Good new Metroidvanias lately can be counted on one hand, and that's if you're a Ninja Turtle. So here's another one for you. Not too long ago, Mandragora Whispers of the Witch Tree came out. It's a game where you play as an inquisitor who went against the priest king and now wanders through a dark world to stop entropy. Basically, a cosmic infection that breeds monsters. I'll say right away, this isn't a game where you should expect a unique and expensive story. Atmosphere and direct gameplay take center stage here, and the latter is pretty good. You typically need to choose one of 6 classes that suits you personally, and then just hack through packs of enemies. And yeah, you shouldn't expect wild hardcore-like games from software. This game will be much easier in that regard. Along the way, you'll craft different gear to find your own build, as is classic for the genre. Naturally, boss fights are in place here too. Yeah, there aren't that many of them, but in my opinion, they're implemented pretty well. The visual style and art of the game are also worth mentioning. Throughout the playthrough, you'll visit many locations, from caves to snowy mountains. And each one is like a living painting you want to screenshot and set as your wallpaper. But despite all this, the game is far from perfect. Again, there's no special difficulty for hardcore fans, and boss fights feel quite easy. That's only a plus for casual gamers, but hardcore lovers might not like it. So, just keeping you informed. Let's step away from all that hardcore gameplay stuff. How about something simpler, but insanely atmospheric? For example, I suggest paying attention to this year's low-key newcomer, the Midnight Walk. This is a real gem in the AA segment that'll drag you into its dark world and tell you several fairy tales that are just soaked in Tim Burton's spirit, which you can immediately see from the visuals. As a player, you control a character nicknamed The Burnt, who travels through a dark world where the sun has disappeared. You won't have to travel alone, though. The hero also has a companion, this little pot. This strange but faithful friend will help you light the way, but you need to protect your companion from dangerous monsters who want to devour your partner's flame. The game itself is divided into 5 touching and interesting stories that you'll discover as you play. They're like fairy tales about will, loss, and hope, presented without unnecessary words through the environment and strange characters. Yeah, maybe not a masterpiece, but it definitely hooks you. Gameplay-wise, this is a puzzle horror with stealth elements. There's no combat. You hide in wardrobes, distract monsters with fire, or solve puzzles by lighting candles with matches and, well, a cannon. The game goes pretty quickly, about 5 to 6 hours, and feels like a good, scary bedtime story. The game reveals itself especially well in VR, which it's mainly designed for anyway. And that wasn't the only interesting indie horror. Another newcomer came out in the already known Bendy series, namely Bendy Lone Wolf. Story-wise, we play as Boris, this cute cartoon wolf in a vest who wakes up in the dark corridors of an abandoned animation studio. Yeah, that same one from the first parts where ink comes alive and creates creepy stuff. Plus, despite the game being horror, it also contains roguelike elements, including battles with enemies and bosses. It takes an average of 10 hours to complete, sometimes even 15 if you go through it completely. The game doesn't have long, boring cutscenes and such. They basically throw you right into action. You need to find keys and run from monsters. Plus, considering these runs are far from repetitive, you also need to find tools. And logically, with each such run, the studio changes, from conveyor workshops with traps to abandoned theaters with ghostly projections. Basically, if you love unique horrors, this is one of them. According to reviews on Steam, the game is in great shape. Next is The Altars. Probably the most atypical survival game of all that have come out recently, with both classic genre mechanics and something new. Let's start with the story setup. You play as a miner whose ship crashed on a planet with a blazing sun where radiation just burns everything to hell. All crew members died. Only you remain. So throughout the game, the hero finds a substance that allows him to clone alternative versions of himself, altars with different fates. One's an engineer, another's a researcher, a third's a scientist, each with their own issues. The task fitting the genre is to survive by controlling wheel-shaped bases that roll so you don't burn up under the sun. So, for example, during the day you collect resources, metal, organics. At night you hide and improve your base, build laboratories, social rooms, and radiation filters. There's basically no combat in the game. The main focus is on survival, crafting, and management. The altars themselves aren't just dummies either. They have their own personalities, and if you don't find common ground through dialogues, they might rebel or even go on strike. The game's atmosphere is pretty good too, somewhat reminiscent of a mix of hopelessness and loneliness. If you like that sort of thing, you definitely shouldn't skip it. And this is Bionic Bay. In my opinion, probably the most creative platformer to come out recently. The game might remind you of Limbo or Inside. Here too, we have a lone hero, gameplay based on physics, and some unknown evil trying to destroy us. But with one small caveat. Physics plays the most key role in all the gameplay here. The main objective is pretty obvious. Escape using jumps, dashes, and an overpowered swap mechanic that lets you change places with objects. And then, as you progress, new skills unlock, like time slowdown, gravity reversal, or telekinesis for throwing stuff around. In the game, each level is a puzzle where you need to combine abilities, physics, and timing, so you don't become shish kebab. You get 30 levels total, and the game takes an average of 5 to 10 hours to complete, which is a nice plus for busy people who don't have much free time. By the way, many call this game like a second Portal, but in 2D. So each level here is a kind of test of logic and reflexes, and the world is like a sci-fi painting you can't look away from. Pretty solid indie platformer with a decent concept, if you ask me. I recommend it if you love games where you need to think and aren't afraid of dying a couple times, since that's basically the foundation of all the gameplay. And this is South of Midnight. Another game with quite beautiful visual style and pretty good story, but unfortunately with not the most successful gameplay. But let's talk about everything in order. Story-wise, we play as a girl named Hazel who is living peacefully in a small southern town in the USA, until one day a hurricane appears that destroys everything, including the house where our main character's mother was staying. As a result, our lady gains the abilities of a magical weaver whose task is not only to save her mother, but also help the surrounding characters. You'll meet plenty of the latter as you play, and what's most interesting is that each has their own unique story, seasoned not only with gorgeous visuals in each chapter, but also an equally gorgeous soundtrack. Seriously, if songs and games usually just play in the background, here each one is seamlessly woven into the gameplay. And if you listen closely, the immersion only intensifies since each one tells a character's story and their motives. Personally, the song about Bendy hit right in the feels, just like the graphics in the game, which are done in this partly comic book style and stop-motion animation. The latter isn't used everywhere, mainly in cutscenes and animations, but it looks great. Many of you have seen something similar in the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie. As for minuses, maybe only the gameplay. And not all of it, just the combat, which feels straight out of PlayStation 3 era games. But everything else is in perfect order. And this game, even though it came out back in August, didn't get much attention, but it definitely deserves to be tried. Especially since these same developers previously released two amazing indie games that many people really loved back then. Far Lone Sails and Far Changing Tides. So let's keep it short and to the point. According to the game's story, you play as a lone hero in a world where another post-apocalypse happened. But not zombies or anything like that. The world just had another ending, and almost all people simply disappeared. However, the hero stumbles upon very strange and unique creatures that look a lot like sheep, only bigger and with floppy ears. As you can probably guess, they'll become our companions throughout the playthrough. Moreover, each of these, let's say, fluffy friends is unique in their own way. Some are more cowardly, others are brave or cheeky. The game itself, in the spirit of such projects, is presented entirely without words, through the environment. And this is implemented beyond praise because usually in such games the meaning is revealed exactly at the end of the playthrough. I won't spoil anything, but those who played something similar understand me perfectly right now. And yeah, even though the graphics in the game are low-poly, they're quite nice thanks to the artist's work. Also can't help but praise the soundtrack. Maximally minimalistic, which fits perfectly with the game's theme. Eriksholm, The Stolen Dream. However, if constant epic isn't for you and you prefer stealth gameplay, then I definitely recommend this game, which became a real gift for all stealth game enthusiasts. Especially for those who like the Shadow Tactics or Desperados game series, since there are many similar gameplay elements here. Though graphically, the game will be several steps ahead. Not only in terms of location design, but also including cutscenes that are directed and shown no worse than in modern AAA games for sure. But let's talk about the game itself. Here we play as a young girl whose brother is kidnapped, and she must find him. The events unfold in industrial Scandinavia of the 20th century. Factories and plants with steam engines everywhere, whales in the streets, and plague that's mowing down the population one by one. And while the setup initially seems cliché, The longer you progress through the story, the more interesting and twisted it becomes, which is quite a nice plus for a game where the focus should seemingly be on gameplay. And speaking of which, it's also extremely good here. You're basically facing an isometric stealth game where you're given a location and tons of variations on how to get through everything unnoticed and effectively using both environment and your equipment. You can and should hide in shadows, distract enemies with objects, or crawl through pipes to stay undetected. Basically, a must-have for lovers of stealth-themed games, especially considering there are fewer and fewer games in this genre each year. Blueprints. Puzzles are usually that genre of games that few people want to pay attention to. Let's be honest, you have to think, and thinking is boring and tedious, but not all games in this genre are dreary crap. For example, the game Blueprints recently came out. Let's briefly explain why it's worth paying attention to. The story setup is as follows. You play as a hero who inherited a pretty nice mansion, but with a catch. To claim the inheritance, you need to find the mythical 46th room in a mansion with 45 rooms. Here you rebuild the mansion every day, choosing rooms from 3 random blueprints. At the same time, rooms from bedrooms to laboratories have doors that must connect, otherwise it's a dead end. Plus, you have limited steps here. Basically stamina. And if you run out, the day ends, the mansion resets, which adds difficulty to the playthrough. So you'll definitely have to think more than once. Throughout the game, you'll solve tons of various puzzles, find keys, open safes, flip switches, and collect coins for gear. The puzzles here are diverse, from simple math logic ones to wild ones where you need to connect lore and notes through dozens of runs. In short, if you were looking for a puzzle that will really test your knowledge and logic, this is one of them. I highly recommend paying attention to it. LEGO Voyagers. It takes two, but from LEGO, if we're trying to briefly describe this game, which didn't really gain much popularity but at least got positive reviews from players on Steam. To keep it short but relevant, this is a cooperative game where you control 2 small LEGO bricks, nameless brothers. There's no heart-wrenching story setup here, and frankly, it's not really needed. As you play, you make your way through zones, from nature trails to abandoned scientific bases and industrial hangars. Along the way, everything changes somehow, from bright autumn colors to gray metallic tones. The gameplay itself doesn't really need much introduction. You collect resource bricks, build platforms, stairs, even mini rockets to overcome obstacles and solve various puzzles. You can play the game either together on one screen or online, whatever's more convenient. The game goes pretty quickly, by the way. About 3 hours, maybe 5 max. Perfect for killing a couple of well-spent evenings with your friend, if you ask me. Split Fiction. The only game in this video that you can only complete in co-op. Like the previous creation from many of the same developers behind It Takes Two. In short, this story game tells the tale of 2 girls. One loves writing about dark science fiction futures, the other about fantasy. As you can guess, both heroines are complete opposites of each other. However, both genres intertwine with each other. And throughout the playthrough, you'll constantly jump from fantasy to cyberpunk and so on, playing together with a friend either on one PC or online. The main cherry on top is that the game is insanely diverse and doesn't let you get bored, since each level is a new genre and mechanic. One moment you're a cyber ninja with a gravity blaster, the next you're a fairy on a dragon, then you're fighting a giant robot. You definitely won't get bored here. Gameplay-wise, we have a typical cooperative adventure. There's platforming, puzzle solving, and boss battles. The game consists of 8 chapters and takes an average of 12 to 15 hours to complete. This is one of those cases where the game literally flies by in one breath. Too bad the story itself is partly cliched. Another test of friendship through trials. But personally, I don't see anything wrong with that. If you were looking for a new story game that you can run through from start to finish with your friend, this is one of those games that definitely deserves your attention. Sword of the Sea. A game from the developers of The Amazing Journey, which I absolutely love. So I was waiting for this new creation more than anyone else. I actually already talked about this game in one of my new game compilations, so I'll try to be brief. First thing you should know, Again, all the story and plot here, similar to the game above, is presented without any words, rather through the environment. You'll be playing in a completely lonely world as well. The character will move through this world on a local glider that looks more like a flying sword, while admiring the beauty of a bygone civilization. And the visual part combined with the music is probably the strongest side of the game because the gameplay is overall simple and doesn't require special effort. I'd also like to praise the animation. The way the hero moves looks stunning. But that's not surprising, since more than 10 years ago, the same animations were in Journey. If you like such indie projects that, despite their budget, look like a real living painting, then you definitely shouldn't skip this. Well, if you were suddenly looking for a survival game with much more familiar gameplay for the genre, then I'd definitely recommend Into the Dead: Our Darkest Days. Yeah, I'm not telling you about it for the first time, so let's keep it short and to the point. If you played something like This War of Mine, then the gameplay formula here is very similar in many ways. Same side view and same harsh survival. The only difference is the setting, since we're in Texas from the 80s, and you play as the leader of your own group that you need to get to evacuation. I'll note right away that you won't be able to save everyone. The game has permanent death mechanics, so if one of your companions went on a raid and didn't return alive, well, they'll never return at all. This adds replayability and interest to the game. Each character here has their own pros and cons. For example, pros might include cooking skills and first aid, while cons might be personality or stamina issues. I think you get it. You'll typically send people on supply runs for provisions, medicine, and resources to both craft something new and defend your base, which will be periodically attacked by walking meat. And yeah, the latter are quite dangerous here. They sense both by smell and hear well, so you'll often have to act stealthily. Fortunately, the atmosphere, especially the sound, is just candy. I recommend playing with headphones for full immersion if possible. The Beholder game series doesn't really need an introduction. It already has, as far as I know, a full 3 numbered parts, and recently something like a spin-off came out with the subtitle Conductor. Yeah, if before you had to be, let's say, a communal rat looking for secrets of ordinary residents in some apartment building, now you have to do essentially the same thing, just on a train, playing as a conductor. Your job is to watch passengers, checking tickets, searching luggage, sniffing out contraband, weapons, leaflets, and deciding what to do with violators. Turn them in, kick them out, take a bribe, or help. Various tools help you with this: reports, intimidation, searches, and even ejection, sometimes with lethal outcomes. The entire train is basically your world, from general cars to VIP compartments with generals and mafia. Like in previous parts, the game has many moral choices you'll face, and they affect the ending. There are 10 of them here. The game takes an average of 5 hours to complete, but if you want to unlock all endings, it could take 15. It's a matter of taste, so to speak. So it's ultimately up to you to decide what role you want to play. Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon. Next, we have an amazing newcomer that just came out and managed to grab a huge pile of positive reviews on Steam. So if you haven't heard about it, I'll try to briefly explain what it actually is. Right away, I'll say this is an RPG in an open world. The world, by the way, is based on Arthurian legends, where the Round Table is in ruins, and darkness seeps from every stone like cursed syrup. You play as an ordinary prisoner who has the soul of Arthur himself, trying to figure out what the hell is going on and stop the darkness that inhabits the world. That world is divided into 3 main zones, including over 200 side quests, tons of NPCs, enemies, and complete freedom in terms of progression, somewhat reminiscent of Elden Ring. So they throw you into the world, and then you're on your own. Go and do whatever you want. You can and should choose a suitable combat style and fight, naturally. What's worth noting is that the world isn't just stuffed with random things. It's genuinely interesting to explore, which is definitely rare for most modern games. What's also great, besides combat, there are other mechanics in the game. You've got crafting, alchemy, fishing, cooking, and even farming. The developers claim the game is about 70 hours long, but considering its replayability and the desire to peek into every corner, you could disappear for a whole 100 hours. And probably one more interesting story indie horror for today. One that's literally soaked in Slavic folklore, which isn't surprising at all. The game's developers are the same ones who gave us the magnificent Black Book in their time. A pretty good indie project I also recommend checking out. The story setup here is as follows. You play as a guy about 20 years old, an orphan from a remote village somewhere in an alternative 19th century Russia. The latter is classically dark and distinctive. The hero himself lived peacefully until one day he decides to find his Likho, a one-eyed embodiment of evil fate that, as usual, brings misfortune. Why? No clue. You'll find out the answer as you play through, which will take at most 4 hours, if not less. And considering the game's genre, it's quite logical that the hero goes into a dark forest where everything is soaked in mysticism and starts digging into puzzles to not only meet this Likho, but also escape from it. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty familiar mechanics for such indie horrors. Mainly, you explore locations, illuminate them with a matchbox, solve simple puzzles, gradually learn the lore of everything happening, and hide from this very Likho. As I said before, the main focus is still on atmosphere, and the latter turned out quite good. Plus, the distinctive black and white visual style, which isn't seen that often in games, and excellent voice acting, so you definitely won't have to read subtitles.